Power of Class in America by Michael Morales. The idea of race, gender, and class have been dividing points throughout history between the rich and the poor. Between the 18th century and the 21st century, class has been the main focal point that has divided the nation in its entire growth. Affluent white men have set the rules and laws that we live by in this country. They have done this by limiting the rights of women and suppressing an entire race of African Americans, both men and women. From combating slavery to combating the idea of women inferiority and their rights to be viewed as equals, class has always been at the forefront of standards and laws that we must live by in a society. As we take a look at the centuries of America's history, class has been the main divide that has affected gender, race, and income inequalities. To understand the power that class has, let's take a look at race. According to historian George Fitzhugh, slavery was beneficial. Fitzhugh comes from a high-class family of slave owners. His view of what slavery entails shows that the African Americans are content with their labor because they are treated well in sickness and health. Slavery is demoralizing and demeaning action, showing power and weakening an entire group of people, in this case, African Americans. Only slavery's victims, if it is possible to use the word only, in the context of so many millions of stolen lives, Brown reminds us that we approach the history of slavery by way of whispers and shadows, where truth has often been hidden in half-truth in order to be saved away for the future. We approach it, that is to say, across a field of argument in which the history of slavery has been conscripted to the economic, political, and imperial purposes that have hidden inside the world of freedom. Over the 4 centuries of Atlantic slavery, millions of Africans and their descendants were turned into profits, fancies, sensations, and possessions of New World whites. The upper-class plantation owner, claiming ownership of another race solely based on the construct of superiority, is a demeaning notion that even though you aid in taking care of your property, you still view the person as property and not as a human being. Gender superiority is another social construct formed by the upper class. The idea is that white men are superior in intelligence, morality, and physicality. Between the 17th and early 20th century, the rules set to suppress the rights of women by blocking their rights to vote and allowing them a voice in lawmaking. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, activist and leader of the women's rights movement, gave a speech on the importance of women's rights. But we did assemble to protest against a form of government existing without the consent of the governed, to declare our right to be free as men is free, to be represented in the government which we are taxed to support, to have such disgraceful laws as give to man the right to chastise and imprison his wife, to take the wages which she earns, the property which she inherits, and in case of separation, the children of her love, laws which make her the mere dependent on his bounty. It was to protest against such unjust laws as these, and to have them, if possible, forever erased from our statute books, deeming them a standing shame and disgrace to a professedly Republican Christian people in the 19th century. Men were taught to be the breadwinners of a household and therefore set the standard for men of an upper class to be the ones to work and vote on the laws that would affect us as a household. Since upper class women didn't work or need to work, their voices were never acknowledged. Working class families and those of a lower class, however, did not have the luxury of not working. Because of their work contributions, as well as their children, women fought hard for the opportunity to have the rights and be heard. Industrialization posed a potential threat to the traditional gender hierarchy of pre-industrial patriarchy by creating opportunities for women to enter the labor force and achieve economic independence. For centuries, women's suffrage was a goal for women that was fought to give women the chance to be viewed as equals in society and give their voices a chance to be heard. With the growing industrialization of America, it almost seemed inevitable that women would get the driving force needed to combat gender suppression. Class in America has always been a divide of rich, upper class versus middle and lower class Americans. From indentured servitude to slavery to oppression of rights, high class society has been the voice of law in this country. Even now, in our progressive lives, the affluent and well-connected set laws for the good of all of the country, at other times to benefit themselves. Lower-class citizens struggle to live sometimes. We see throughout history that working class work harder for less, while upper class benefit the most from the work of middle to lower class. As we see from a letter from Richard Frethorn to his parents, he pleads with his parents to pay off his indentured servitude contract for the terrible conditions he lives in is shown with disease and death. From his letter, you can sense his desperation in realizing that his parents' financial support may not be enough to buy his freedom. And I quote, "If you cannot get the merchants to redeem me for some little money, then for God's sake, get a gathering or entreat some good folks to lay out some little sum of money in meal and in cheese and butter and beef." Immigrants struggle the most as most come from poor countries to have a better life in America. Such is true now as it was then. Immigrants are hard workers and have been the cornerstone of the American dream. When comparing immigrants then and now, some have argued that the current generation of immigrants have skipped the line and taken benefits away from people who lived here longer. Another supposed difference between today's immigrants and those from the past is that contemporary immigrants eagerly take government handouts, while previous generations of newcomers were rugged individualists who would not have accepted such assistance, even if it had been available to them. Nothing could be further from the truth. Even before the advent of the New Deal, when the federal government began helping the poor and unemployed in large numbers for the first time, there were state, municipal, and even quasi-governmental programs that gave assistance to millions of immigrants. While there is help for the middle and lower class, it seems it isn't enough because of the amount the higher class citizens own and possess. Some would argue that being too successful means everyone wants a cut of your hard-earned money. But what middle and lower class citizens ask for is simply a fair share of taxes paid from the wealthy. However, with the upper class having more influence on laws, there's a likelihood that things won't change between higher and lower class citizens. Racism and sexism have been constructed by those of an elite class, whether it's from slavery or indentured servitude or suppression of one's voice and influence based on being a woman. Those of a higher class have always have the control needed to sway things in their favor. We see from George Fitzhugh arguing the benefits of slavery, though we know it to be wrong and an evil act, or power over an entire race. Women of working and lower classes are forced to work to help bring revenue into the household to help their husbands. Children being forced to work takes away from their education, which puts them at a disadvantage than children who come from a higher class. Immigrants who come from poverty enter the country in hopes to work hard and eventually become someone of a higher status in society. They are met with hardships that may leave them at a disadvantage from becoming something great because they are not given the same educational or career advantages as those of a higher class. These disadvantages can also affect their children and even grandchildren. The truth is, unless you're born into a higher class or get lucky enough to raise yourself to a higher status, then you will be met with struggle and hardships with little chance to influence society for the better. And even if you do gain success, the ladder may be harder to climb if you are a woman or a person of color. Thanks for listening.